you'll notice we have a lot of time that we're spending on this module. And that's for a couple reasons. One, it is a little bit harder, so we're taking our time as we go through it. But two, we have that like spring pause thing this week. So we're essentially just slowing down this week. Like we're spending 2 days on part one. We have like a review day in the middle of the module on Friday. And let me think. I think these have been adjusted as well. Let me take a look real quick. Yeah, I think even this homework got pushed back a little bit. So we tried to minimize the amount of homework that we have this week because of that spring pause thing. So today we're working on part one, but as you can see, we have a lot of time here. We can spend 2 days on this. So what are we up to in this module? This module is all about trying to start a Kickstarter campaign. And if you don't know how Kickstarter works, the idea is you're trying to start like a business or some idea or something that requires some funding to get started. And so you say, I'm going to go create this business where we produce these bike parts, which is what we're going to do later in the module. And you tell people, I need $20,000 to get started. Well, if people want your product, they'd send in like 10 bucks each or whatever to try to get you the funding to get started. And if you reach that goal, enough people send you enough money to meet that like $20,000 goal, for example, then you get to keep all that money from the website and put it towards your business, hopefully produce the thing you're trying to produce and send it back to the people who funded your business. That's the idea here. So we are going to be analyzing a bunch of historical data to see what was successful in the past, and then try to emulate it for our campaign to see if we can also be successful. That's the basic idea. If we look at the spreadsheet, we have 4 tabs. First tab, nothing really of note. Second tab is where we're going to be playing today. And this is database. We have a couple of columns here, but first thing I want to point out is there are 90,000 rows. This file is obnoxiously large, so it might take a little bit to load every now and then. So just be aware of that. And then other than that, we have each row referencing some Kickstarter project that's happened in the past. And it tells us how many backers actually sent money in, tells us what categories it falls under and what time this particular project ran, and tells us the goal level, which is how much money they thought they needed in order to start this project. Creator, don't care about. And then last of all, how much money was actually sent in, which is important. And the reason why is one of the first things we're doing in part one is we're analyzing how many of these projects were successful. And we define success as the pledged amount meeting at least the goal level. So where this number is at least that guy to its left. So this first row was successful. And let's say this one in row 6, not so much. They expected that they would need $40,000 to start this project. And so they started Kickstarter. They only got $3,000 pledged to them. They don't get to keep any of that money. It all goes back to the backers because they were unable to raise enough by their particular end date. You know, Kickstarter is not going to let you just keep $1,000 if you needed $40,000 to get started, because what's the point at that point? You're not going to do anything with that money. So those are the types of things we're analyzing today, and I wanted to talk about a few things in my notes, just how to get started. First thing I wanted to mention is this file, like I said, is obnoxiously large. So if you want, you can delete these 3 columns. We're not going to use them, and it'll shrink the file by a little bit, not by 90% or anything crazy like that, but enough to where maybe it'll shave a little bit of time off the loading that can occur when you're opening these files. The next thing I want to talk about is in part 1, you are going to be adding some columns to the database before you actually do any calculations. For example, you are going to be calculating how many of these projects were successful, and you can't just say, well, count how many times this column is bigger than this column. What you have to do is create a new column that summarizes whether or not it was successful down to a single value. Then you can do that with like an if statement. You could say, well, if pledge is greater than or equal to goal, well, maybe we put a 1 here to indicate success and a 0 to indicate failure. And then once you have that column, all you have to do is count the ones, which is really nice, because then it's something that COUNTIF can actually do. Next thing I want to point out is a brand new function that is very useful. We have this column of end dates, which looks like that. It's just has a whole lot of date information in there. But there's a question in part 1 that specifically says, okay, how many of these are in 2015? And it's really obnoxious to see, or to like pull out the 2015 from this cell if that's all you're doing. So here's a really nice function. This is called the year function. All you do is click on this large date and it strips out the year for you. So if you create a column of just these values, it's really easy to count how many are in 2012 and so on, because you just have to compare that column to one number. You don't have to worry about all this excess information. And then last of all, you won't get to this question until the end of part 1, but there'll be a question about funds collected. And funds collected is just slightly different than pledge. So it's not the same as this column. What it's going to be is potentially another if statement where you say, if they were successful, so like this row was successful, they get to collect all of that $18,705. But let's say we're looking at, oops, this guy, they were not successful. They collect 0. So you need an if statement that either puts that number in the collected column or puts a 0 in there, because that's what you would collect in the failure case. So those 3 columns that I've described here are going to be helpful in your calculations for part 1. Next little tip, there is a column called category, and there's a second column called category parent. Don't mix those up. So like if it's asking about one of these things and you can't find it in your column, it's likely that you're just looking in the wrong spot. It's very easy to mix these up. Just be aware of that is all. And last of all, I just wanted to show you one quick organizational thing that you don't have to do, but it's kind of nice. Let's say you want to count how many projects have art as their category. Well, you can do a count ifs on that particular column and then click on a cell where you type the word art, which works. And then you could have one for the next question where you type like crafts in, which is great. But I wanted to point out this next organizational thing for the following reason. One, let's say like you accidentally type a space there or something. It matches that symbol by symbol. It doesn't see any spaces and you find 0. Or let's say you accidentally have a typo and again, finds nothing. So as sort of a backup plan, what you can do instead of just typing the word in, you can make a drop-down menu. And the drop-down menu is nice, not only because it looks kind of cool, but you can't really make a typo when the drop-down menu is doing everything for you. So I want to show you real quick how to create one of these if you want. Don't have to, but it is kind of nice. And you use it the exact same way you would use a criteria cell. You just have this drop-down, which all it does is type the word for you, and then you reference it as your criteria inside of a COUNTIF or inside of an average if. So how does this work? We're going to follow these steps over here. So what I have in column F is, all 90,000 entries in that particular category parent column. What we're going to do first is copy this somewhere. So I'm going to copy it and paste it maybe over here to the right. And then I'm going to go over to the data tab and look for a new button we've never used called remove duplicates. So if your window is a little smaller, it looks like this guy with a red X over here to the right. If you, stretch your window a little wider, it'll actually say the word, but sometimes you don't have enough space on your screen for that. Just look for this red X and it'll say remove duplicates when you hover over it. If I click that, whoops, lost my selection. So highlight that, Click that. And once I hit OK, these 90,000 things become 16 things. It got rid of all the duplicates. There we go. Now I could make a drop down out of this, but they're not in alphabetical order, which is kind of annoying because then you can't easily find what you're looking for. So if we highlight all this stuff and either click one of these sorting buttons here on the data tab or on the home tab, there's more sorting buttons. We get them in alphabetical order, which is much nicer for our dropdown. So it'll look like that after you finish those steps. And then let's say you want to make a dropdown right here. Click, well, I typed a label first, and then you click on some blank cell where you would normally type these words. You're going to go back to the data tab. I'm on step 4 now. And right underneath remove duplicates is a button called data validation. If you click on that and change this first drop down from any value to a list, and then change the source of the list to these things that you just made and hit OK. Now you get this little arrow next to this cell and it populates it with this list. One slightly annoying thing is you cannot delete this list because it's using it to populate this drop down menu. So it's kind of annoying to have this thing floating around, but you can always just paste it like 10 columns over to the right so it's out of your way. So that's how to make a drop-down menu. There are a lot of steps, but once you do it once for this column, you don't have to do it again. You can just copy this and paste it, and now you have 2 drop-down menus if you need them. You will have to do this process kind of twice though, because you're going to want to likely do it for column C, and you're going to also want to do it for column D. And so once you have those done twice, then you can just make copies of those things you created to continue using.